This is Audible.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Game Changer by Rachel Reid, narrated by Tortom. Chapter 1. Tuesday, January 14, was the day Kip Grady learned that loud blenders and hangovers didn't mix. He hadn't meant to drink so much last night, but Chuck and Jimmy had been in town and he hadn't seen those guys in months. It wasn't like he'd gotten wrecked. He had been aware that he'd needed to be at work at 6 the next morning, but he'd still managed to drink just enough to make the high-powered blenders his mortal enemy. But he had a job to do, and that job was to make the best damn smoothie he could for the busy-looking woman waiting at the counter. "Here you are, ma'am." He tried not to wince as he handed the customer her order. "One green warrior smoothie with a sweetgrass shot." He glanced at the clock. 6:30. Jesus Christ. There was no time to rest his head on the evening pile of oranges that sat on the counter. The weekday morning rush at Straw and Berry tended to be steady right up until 9. Maria was working with him this morning, and that was cool. They worked well together, because while neither of them was particularly invested in this job, they took it seriously and did everything they were supposed to. Plus, she was funny. "Which of these damn smoothies cures a hangover?" Kip moaned when the shop was briefly empty. None, but allegedly the watermelon one." "Okay, I'm going to make myself a giant watermelon one with like 5 Advils in it." "I think you mean 5 wellness boosts." Kip did make himself a giant watermelon smoothie, and he did feel slightly better after drinking it. He took 2 Advil. "So what were you up to last night anyway?" Maria asked. "Oh, just hanging out with some college friends." "Yeah? Are they cute?" "Nah, I don't know. Not my type." Chuck was big, burly, and bearded. Jimmy was the complete opposite. Short, slim, and looked about 7 years younger than he actually was. "Are they super successful juice bar baristas too?" "They got jobs in their field. They're both working in Boston. Business something, insurance, finance, I don't know. They wear suits to work." "You wear an apron. That's pretty great." "Yeah, I'm super proud." "And a ball cap with a little strawberry embroidered on it. Come on." Kip threw a chunk of frozen pineapple at her. "Tell you what, Kipper, I'm going to be nice and do all the prep work in the back this morning, so you can just rest your pretty head when the rush is over." "Yeah?" "Yep." "You are the best, and I love you." He sighed happily. "I know. Now look alive. We've got businesswomen coming in, and they want liquefied kale." It was another hour of steady rush before Kip was finally able to enjoy the quiet that Maria had promised him. She went to the back room to chop fruit and vegetables, and he slumped onto a chair he had dragged behind the counter and pressed his face against the wall. It was a nice, cool wall. He hadn't even realized he had closed his eyes until he was startled by someone clearing their throat. Not aggressively, just enough to let him know they were there. He opened his eyes and stood quickly. "Sorry, sir," he stammered. "What can I—" Kip's mouth may have dropped open like a cartoon character's. Possibly his jaw was on the floor, and his tongue may have rolled out of his mouth like a carpet. It just so happened that the hottest man he had ever seen was standing in front of him. What can I get for you?" Kip managed. The man was tall, blond, and, well, ripped. And Kip knew he was ripped because he was wearing a ridiculously tight Under Armour zip-up jacket thing and sweatpants. He must have just finished a run, the way his damp hair clung to his forehead and his skin glistened with sweat. "Good morning," the sweaty man said cheerfully. "Sorry to wake you." Kip's cheeks flushed. He dipped his head a bit so the brim of the stupid baseball cap would conceal it. God, the hottest man in the world is standing in front of me, and I'm wearing an apron and a strawberry baseball cap. I wasn't—" Kip took a breath. "Pull it together. Sorry. Had a bit too much fun last night." The man raised an eyebrow. "On a Monday night?" "Yeah, well, you know the life of a smoothie maker. Live fast, die young, right?" The man laughed. Kip nearly fell over. So what's good here? The man asked, squinting at the menu. There's one with blueberries and pineapple and kale, but you can't taste the kale, I swear. It's good. I like it. That would be the Blue Moon over Brooklyn? Yeah. All the names here are kind of dumb. The man pointed a long finger at Kip's name tag. I like your name. Kip glanced at his own name on the tag, as if he didn't know what it said, like an idiot. It's like a nickname, he said, as if the hot guy had asked him for further information, which he had not. But Kip kept talking because that's what he always did. I mean, everyone calls me Kip, so it is my name, but not like my real name. It's, anyway. You want one of those blueberry smoothies? Sounds good, the man said, politely ignoring how fucking dumb Kip was being. Kip got to work loading the blender with various frozen fruits and fresh kale. Fortunately, it required focus, and then the machine was loud enough that he couldn't talk over it. He glanced over it at the man, who was now standing with his hands on his hips, studying the uninspired photos of fruit that decorated the small space. Kip's eyes didn't know where to land, rapidly jumping from broad shoulders to ridiculously huge arms, to a muscled back tapering into a trim waist, to an ass that was frankly just... Kip shook his head and turned off the blender. He fumbled for a plastic cup and filled it with blue smoothie. Here you are, sir. The man turned, nodded, and handed Kip a folded, slightly damp $20 bill from the pocket of his sweatpants. He waved his hand when Kip tried to hand him his change. Keep it. Seriously? Kip asked, watching him take his first sip, watching his pink lips fit around the straw. Yeah, the man smiled. We'll call it a finder's fee. This is delicious. Kip smiled back. Glad you would like it. Have a nice day. The man toasted him with his smoothie cup. You too, Kip. Kip felt a little giddy at the sound of his name coming from this man's mouth. As his dream man exited, another man who was not nearly as attractive walked into the shop. Holy shit, the new customer said, jerking a thumb toward the door. That was Scott Hunter. Huh? The man looked at Kip like he was very dumb. Scott Hunter? You mean like the hockey player guy? Kip said. What? Came a voice from behind him. Maria stood in the doorway to the back room. Did I seriously miss Scott Hunter? I don't think. Do you really think that was him? Kip asked. The customer nodded. Oh, yeah, definitely. Surprised he shows his face around town, the way he's been stinking up the ice lately. He's not doing well. Kip did have some awareness of who Scott Hunter was, of course. Everyone did, sports fan or not. He was the star center and team captain of the New York Admirals. 3 years ago, he had led Team USA to Olympic gold. But Kip mostly knew him from his Hugo Boss ads. He was a big fan of those ads. Kip liked hockey just fine, but he hadn't been following the NHL too closely. Scott Hunter had always been, to his knowledge, celebrated and beloved in this town. The king of New York, really. But apparently, Kip had missed something. Yeah, he's been terrible this season, the customer continued. Hasn't scored a goal since November. Don't know what they're paying him all that money for. They should trade the bum. Well, Kip said, not sure how to finish. It was ridiculous, but he felt personally offended by this guy's criticisms and was compelled to defend Scott Hunter. Maybe he's just going through some stuff. The customer snorted. He can go through it in the summer. We're not going to make the playoffs this year if he keeps this shit up. Kip still felt inexplicably angry, but shrugged it off and gave the guy his smoothie so he would leave. When they were alone again, Maria said, Was Scott Hunter really in here? Maybe. Now that the guy mentioned it, I think it had to be. I was kind of distracted by how hot he was, but yeah, he definitely looked like Hunter. And, he gave me a huge tip. How huge? We have to split it, you know. Yeah, I know. It was like a $13 tip. What? Well, if it was Hunter, that's probably like nothing, right? He probably doesn't care about money at all. Must be nice. Yeah. So, Maria said, leaning over into Kip's personal space. He was hot? Oh, my God, Kip grinned. He was volcanic. He didn't look real. What was he wearing? Workout clothes. He'd just been running, I think. Really tight workout clothes. Oh, my God. Yup. I can't believe I missed it. If he comes back, you have to tell me. Even if I'm in the bathroom, just get me. Sure, that won't be weird. Maria started loading the freshly chopped fruit and vegetables into the fridges. Kip helped. They worked quietly for a few minutes. Hey, Kip said. He said my name. Who? Hunter? He actually said the word Kip? Yeah, Kip said dreamily. God, I'll bet when he says it, it doesn't even sound dumb. Kip threw a strawberry at her. Kip saw the headline the next morning on the train. Night of the Hunter. He leaned forward a little to read the front page of the paper of the passenger sitting opposite him. Apparently Hunter had scored a hat trick last night and got 2 assists in a 7-1 trouncing of Washington. Kip smiled. He felt oddly proud of him. Yeah, so nice that millionaire superstar had a good night. Sheesh. The Admirals were playing in New Jersey tonight, the paper said. As Kip walked the 2 blocks from the train station to Straw and Berry, he thought about the last time he had been to an Admirals game. Must have been at least 8 years ago. No, longer, because he'd never seen Hunter play except on television. Jesus, am I just going to think about Scott Hunter all the time now? He yawned as he took his key out and unlocked the door to the shop. He needed to find a job with a later start. Getting up before 5 to be at work before 6 was ridiculous, especially for minimum wage. The morning went the same as most weekdays. Steady rush from about 7 until 9, and then a bit of quiet before the customers Maria had dubbed the yoga moms started to trickle in. Your boyfriend had a good night last night, Maria said as she restocked the orange bowl. What the hell are you talking about? Scott Hunter. Scored like 1,000,000 goals or something. 3 goals, Kip corrected her, and 2 assists. Oh, sorry. Didn't realize you were such a hardcore fan. I'm not. I read the paper on the way here. It's like big news or whatever. Oh my God. You are mad crushing on him right now. You went home last night and Google image searched Scott Hunter, didn't you? No. Yes. Whatever. You are such a fanboy. So cute. I hate you. You don't. Maria stacked oranges and Kip swept the floor behind the counter, even though it wasn't that dirty. He just hated standing around doing nothing. At a little past 10, the door opened and Kip was once again faced with Scott Hunter in sweaty workout clothes. This time Maria was there to witness it. Holy shit. Kip elbowed her as subtly as possible. Good morning again, Kip, the man who was definitely Scott Hunter said. Good morning, Jesus. You're Scott Hunter, right? He looked amused. I am? That is so awesome, Maria breathed. It's, Kip started, then switched courses. Great game last night. Thanks. Thought I might get another one of those blueberry smoothies. When something goes right in my game, I like to try to repeat what I did that day. Right, Kip said. Scott's eyes were blue. They were so blue. So, another blueberry smoothie, please. Right. Kip broke out of his trance and got to work making the smoothie. Scott Hunter was, once again, wearing an absurdly tight Under Armour jacket and sweatpants. His hair was damp and mussed, and his skin was slightly flushed from exercise. Kip Grady was, once again, wearing a fucking dumb apron and a ball cap with a goddamn strawberry on it. But at least he wasn't hungover this time. He handed the star athlete his smoothie and tried not to focus too closely on the way his lips wrapped around the straw. It was difficult, because Scott was looking directly at him as he took his first sip. His lips curved up a bit when he noticed Kip staring. Thanks again, Kip, he said. Hopefully I'll see you next game day. He raised the smoothie cup in a farewell salute and then he left. When Kip turned to Maria, her jaw was on the floor. "Hopefully I'll see you next game day," she said. "Are you kidding me?" "What?" "He's completely into you, Grady." Kip turned as red as the strawberry on his hat. "Oh, come on. That's not what he meant." "Sure it isn't." "It isn't. It's just superstitious. He means he hopes it works, and he has a great game tonight, so he'll be back again next game day. That's it." "I know that's what he was saying on the surface, idiot, but that's not all he was saying."
"He's not even... Oh, my God. I can't believe I'm talking about this. Scott Hunter is not into dudes. And he's definitely not into dudes who work at smoothie shops."
"If you say so."
"I'm going to go back there and chop the pineapple,"
Kip grumbled. "Better check to make sure we have lots of blueberries stocked," Maria sing-songed after him. Kip stood in the living room of his best friend's Tribeca apartment, admiring the view of the Hudson River. He couldn't even imagine what a place like this would cost. Living in New York City was expensive, but Kip had a super impressive strategy that allowed him to work a minimum wage job and manage to file his student loan payments on time each month. He still lived with his parents. Living in New York City was expensive, but Kip had a super impressive strategy that allowed him to work a minimum wage job and manage to file his student loan payments on time each month. He still lived with his parents. Yes, he was 25. Yes, he had graduated university when he was 22. But the thing was, history majors weren't exactly being snapped up on the job market. Kip had dreams, aspirations. He wanted to work at one of the museums. Maybe move on to work at one in Europe one day. Maybe write a book or two. Maybe host a popular television show where he traveled the world and presented different important historic sites to the home viewers. Maybe consult on historical movies in Hollywood. Or maybe turn fruit and vegetables into drinkable mush for busy people on their way to jobs that were actually important. The owner of the apartment in which he now stood, Elena, had a real job and a life that seemed very adult compared to Kip's. She was a cybersecurity engineer for Equinox Tech, one of the fastest-growing IT companies in the country. Kip did not know what exactly a cybersecurity engineer was, but it seemed to pay very well and it sounded impressive. Elena was, hands down, the smartest person Kip knew. Besides being brilliant and funny, she was also stunningly beautiful, an unusual combination of her father's Norwegian height and bone structure, and her mother's Lebanese dark hair and olive skin. Kip's friendship with her back in high school had helped him realize that he wasn't sexually interested in women. Because if he wasn't interested in her, well... Anyway, Elena had probably known he was gay before he did. She knew everything before he did.
"You need a roommate?"
Kip asked, turning away from the windows. "No," she said, "not ever." They settled themselves on her couch to eat Szechuan food. Elena did not cook. Kip had barely taken a bite before Elena casually said, "So, who is he?" Noodles slipped from Kip's chopsticks, sliding back into the box they came from.
"What? Who? What do you mean?"
"You had a dreamy look on your face all night. Who are you thinking about?" Kip's face flushed. He poked at the noodles with his chopsticks.
"No one."
"Christopher?" Elena liked to use his real name when he was exhausting her.
"You'll laugh."
"That doesn't sound like me." Kip smiled at that.
"It's just, you know Scott Hunter?"
"Do I know Scott Hunter?" "Not personally, no."
"You've heard of him, though?"
"Yes."
"Okay, so he's been coming by the shop."
"The smoothie shop?"
"Yeah, the past couple of days. For luck, he says, because he played so well after he got a smoothie yesterday morning. So he came in today and got another one, because they are playing again tonight."
"Okay."
He's really hot is all."
Elena's lips twitched a bit, but she didn't laugh. "That's exciting."
"Yeah."
They continued to eat in silence, and Kip, who apparently could not be cool about this, lasted all of a minute before he blurted out, "He knows my name."
Elena raised an eyebrow. He said, "Good morning, Kip," when he came in today.
Kip tried but failed to keep the dopey grin off his face. That must have been a thrill.
Yeah, and, he says he hopes to see me again. You know, like, if the smoothie works or whatever.
The magic hockey smoothie.
Stop making fun of me.
I'm not. And I'll tell you what else. We are watching that hockey game tonight. Kip was embarrassingly nervous watching the hockey game. Every hit Scott took, Kip flinched. Every shot Scott launched at the net, Kip held his breath. He wanted this game to go well for Hunter, and there was no point in kidding himself about why. At the end of the first period, the score was tied 1-1. Scott stopped on his way into the dressing room for a quick interview. He pulled his helmet off, and his damp hair stuck out in all directions. Kip's heart fluttered. Scott was drenched in sweat, even more so than when he came into the shop after his runs. Kip could see the glisten of it down Scott's neck, into the red collar of his jersey. Scott was saying words about strong defense and working as a team. His beautiful mouth hovered above the microphone, his blue eyes looking neither at the camera nor at the man interviewing him. It was like he was barely present at this interview, already wherever he'd rather be at that moment. "He's definitely attractive," Elena said.
Yeah,
Kip breathed. The game stayed close for the second period. It wasn't until the third period, when Scott scored 2 goals and assisted on 1 more, that the Admirals silenced the fans in the Newark arena. Kip was giddy.
God, he's incredible. That last goal, he probably shot that puck 100 miles an hour, but it looked like slow motion.
He's got talented hands, Elena agreed with a quirk of her lips. She picked up her phone and typed something. "Next game is Saturday night at home against Tampa Bay," she said. "Are you working on Saturday?"
Kip groaned. Fuck. I gotta switch shifts. Who's working Saturday?
He picked up his phone and texted Maria.
Are you working Saturday?
The response came a minute later. "Yes?"
Kip, can I switch with you?
Maria. "Why?"
I'm scheduled for Friday. Let's swap. Please?
"Is this about Scott Hunter?"
Kip felt dumb, but he still typed. Maybe.
"Jesus, Kip."
Please.
"Fine."
There was a pause, and she added,
"You're working with Jeff."
Ugh. Jeff was the worst. Just really lazy and basically stoned all the time. Kip couldn't even believe he still worked there. But it would be worth it, because when the game ended, the score was 6-2 for the Admirals, which meant Scott was going to be coming in on Saturday for sure. Probably for sure. Almost certainly for sure. Chapter 2. Kip may have gotten up extra early on Saturday to put some additional care into his appearance. There had been nothing he could do about his uniform, but he'd at least make sure his nicest jeans were clean, and he had decided to wear the stylish new sneakers he had bought a couple of weeks ago that he could not afford at all, but had not been able to resist. He'd even bothered to fix his hair up a bit, despite knowing he had to slap his stupid ball cap over it. He flossed. He tucked mints into his pocket to cover up his eventual coffee breath. He arrived at the shop 10 minutes early after a relatively relaxing commute, and was not at all surprised to see that he was the first to arrive. He got to work prepping, taking special care to make sure they had the ingredients for Scott's Blue Moon over Brooklyn smoothie ready. 20 minutes after the shop opened at 6, Kip was still alone. Again, not a huge surprise, given that it was Jeff who was scheduled to work with him, but it was grating. At 6:30, the phone rang. Jeff was calling in sick. Kip couldn't even conjure up the energy to be angry, especially since this might mean being all alone in the shop when Scott... You are way too excited about the possibility of a 2-minute interaction with a man who is not at all interested in you, Kip. Saturdays were always way quieter than weekdays. The morning crawled, with just a trickle of customers to break the monotony. Kip ended up pulling out his phone and, of course, reading old articles about Scott Hunter. There were a lot of articles.
Most of them had the same information. Scott had been born and raised in Rochester, and had always been the best player on any team he played for, right from his adolescent days. The articles often highlighted his generous devotion to charities, especially those that helped sick children, and described him as an outstanding role model on and off the ice. The other thing the articles always mentioned was that Scott Hunter was one of New York's most eligible bachelors. He had never been linked to a woman for any significant amount of time. Interesting. And he tended to dodge any questions about his private life. More interesting. Kip was busy saving the photos from Scott's GQ article onto his phone when the door opened. He scrambled to shove his phone into his pocket as Scott Hunter entered the shop. It would be ridiculous to say that Scott's face lit up when he saw Kip, but that really was what it looked like. "Kip," he said, a delighted smile spreading across his sweat-slicked face. "I was worried you might not be working today." "You were?" Kip asked, too shocked to say anything more intelligent. "I just mean—" And did Scott Hunter seem embarrassed? "I like to keep as many things the same in my routine as possible. And you made the other 2 smoothies, so—" "Must be something about the way I make 'em," Kip said, bravely attempting a flirtatious smile. "Must be." Kip gathered the ingredients and started dropping them into the blender. "I watched the game the other night," he said. "That last goal was really something." "Thanks." Scott sounded like he truly appreciated it. "I felt good about that one." He smiled at Kip, whose mouth went dry. He turned on the blender before he could say something stupid like, "What do your abs taste like?" "All alone today?" Scott asked, as Kip handed him his usual. "Yeah, I was supposed to be working with someone, but he called in sick. I don't think he's actually sick. He's kind of useless." Kip cringed inwardly as he said this. "As if Scott Hunter gives a shit about your coworkers." "Sorry to hear it," Scott said. "I've had teammates like that." Kip laughed, because was Scott Hunter seriously comparing their 2 lines of work? You mind if I drink this here?" Scott asked, as if there weren't tables and chairs right next to him. "I just have some emails to read." He pulled his phone out of his pocket and waved it in the air. "Of course, yeah," Kip said, not able to believe his luck. Scott sat at one of the little bistro tables with his back to the door and his face to Kip. Kip tried hard not to just stare at him as Scott scrolled through emails on his phone, occasionally sipping from his blue smoothie. He was drinking it very slowly, it seemed. After 15 minutes, Kip left his station behind the counter and went to work wiping tables that didn't need to be cleaned at all. When he was at the table next to Scott's, he took a chance and broke the silence. "You sure this isn't going to mess up your game? Breaking routine like this?" "What? Oh, no. I don't have to do everything the same. I mean, I'm not that obsessive." "Sure," Kip said, with a bit of a smirk. Scott grinned and even laughed. "I probably do seem weird, don't I? Acting like this smoothie is a magic potion or something." Kip shrugged. "I've read about athletes. You're all nuts, right? Putting your uniforms on a certain way, not changing your socks, not shaving." Scott pointed an accusing finger at him. "Hey, only in the playoffs. And that is a time-honored tradition." "Totally normal, then." Kip could not believe what he was about to do, but he had to test the waters, just a little. "Not saying I mind it," he said, as casually as he could manage. "You guys always look so rugged by the time you hoist the cup, like a bunch of hot lumberjacks." There. So that was out there. Scott looked at him, and Kip could swear the ghost of a smile passed over his lips. But then Scott stood abruptly, and the smile was gone. "Well, I should get going." Kip wanted to die. He had just been flirting with Scott fucking Hunter, and now Scott was going to leave forever because what the hell, Grady? "Thanks again, Kip," Scott said. He was kinder than Kip deserved. But when he got to the door, Scott stopped and turned. "Would you like to go to the game tonight?" "What?" "No one is using my tickets." I could give you 2 so you can bring someone if you like.
Are you serious?
Why wouldn't I be? Kip gaped at the impossibly gorgeous celebrity filling the doorway of the shop, who was offering him a gift for no reason.
If you're sure, I would love to go.
I am sure, and I'm happy to hear that. Just give them your name at will call.
Okay, I'll see you tonight then,
Kip said, like an idiot. Scott just smiled and left. Kip should not have been at all surprised that Scott Hunter's personal seats were phenomenal. 6 rows from the ice, on the blue line facing the home bench. Just unreal. Shit, Elena said. I know Equinox has a box here, but these seats are way better.
I can't believe we're here. I can't believe we're using Scott Hunter's tickets.
It's a weird date, though. You're here with a woman, and he's at work.
It's not a date.
I'm sure he gives tickets to every smoothie shop clerk. Kip had been trying not to think too much about why Scott had given him the tickets.
He's just thanking me because he thinks I'm in some way responsible for his hot streak. Look, I said, he's nuts.
Nuts about you, maybe.
Don't be dumb.
Kip, she said, placing her beer into her cup holder. You do know what you look like, right?
What are you?
You're hot, Grady. Extremely hot.
Okay.
No, listen to me. You are ridiculously good-looking. Do you think I'm happy that you're gay? I am not. Kip rolled his eyes.
As if. And besides,
he lowered his voice to a whisper, leaning in.
We don't know that Hunter is on my team.
Don't we?
No, I mean, I get hints that maybe...
Like how we're sitting in his personal seats because he personally gave you his personal tickets when he visited you at work for the 3rd time this week? Kip was blushing now.
He's just superstitious,
he mumbled.
That's all.
The players came out on the ice to warm up. Kip watched them all skate around, go down on the ice to stretch, take turns lobbing easy shots at their goalies. He tried but failed to not pay too much extra attention to number 21, Scott Hunter. The man was doing a deep lunging hamstring stretch that showed how flexible he was. Kip imagined what that position might look like without the heavily padded hockey pants. His undersexed brain took him on a wonderful journey for a few minutes, and he was so distracted that he almost didn't notice when Hunter skated by the glass in front of them, looking like he'd skated right off a promotional poster in his crisp red, white, and blue uniform, and nodded at him.
No, not at me. Must be it's someone sitting behind me.
Kip turned his head. There was no one sitting behind him yet. No one in front of him either. Huh. The warm-up wrapped up. The Zambonis came out to clear the ice, and then the spectacle that was the pregame show started. The lights went out and videos of the Admirals in action were projected onto the ice, while rock music blared. There was dry ice and pyrotechnics, and when the players came storming out, the place hit a fever pitch. Kip was struck by 2 things. Scott Hunter was a big star. Like, really big. A mammoth superstar athlete, and this city loved him. It seemed like half the people in the crowd were wearing his jersey. And when Scott's name was announced as the game's starting center, the crowd was deafening. He was not just a guy who liked blueberry smoothies and was nice to the shop clerks who made them. This guy was New York, and Kip was here as his guest. Holy fuck. The other thing that struck him was that Scott commanded a lot of respect from his teammates. Kip could see the way the younger players would glow when he clapped them on the shoulder and complimented them on a good play. Even the referees seemed to like him, giving him little taps on the elbow after they explained a penalty decision to him. The game was incredible. Scott was incredible. He not only scored a goal each period and assisted on another one, he also made the crowd roar when he leveled a Tampa winger near center ice with a huge hip check. Kip was the most impressed when Scott broke up a fight before it happened, calming his teammate down with a firm hold on his arm and words that Kip wished he could have heard. It was undeniably sexy to watch Scott displaying so much skill and authority throughout the game. He was spectacular.
"That was so fucking great,"
Kip said, far too loudly as they made their way to the subway after the game.
"I want to go to another one. I want to go to all of them."
"Well, you'll have to wait, Superfan," Elena said. "The Admirals hit the road for the next 2 weeks." Kip should not have felt as devastated as he did by that news. Suddenly, the idea of working an entire shift without seeing Scott seemed unbearable. When he was at home in bed that night, he couldn't help but wonder if Scott was at all unhappy about going on the road, away from his safe routine. He was being stupid. Scott was a professional hockey player who was not going to be missing his dumb smoothies while on the road. Kip sighed and resigned himself to at least 2 weeks of Scott Hunter-free shifts at work. Chapter 3. Scott watched the island of Manhattan disappear as the plane pushed through the thick clouds that had covered the city for days. He felt off, but he didn't know why. It had nothing to do with his game because he was playing better than he had all season. The team was on a winning streak, and they were free of any major injuries. Plus, the team's private plane was taking them to Phoenix, which would give them a nice break from the bitter cold of January in New York. His agent was happy again, at least. A couple of weeks ago, Scott had received a very panicked call from Todd Wheeler, the man who had represented him since his college hockey days.
"We're in real trouble here," Todd had said. "The sponsors don't like what they're seeing from you. Gillette is saying they won't renew next year. Even Under Armour's getting nervous. Fucking Under Armour, Scott. We can't lose them."
If the conversation was supposed to have motivated Scott, it hadn't worked. It wasn't like he hadn't known he was playing terribly, or that he had been happy about it. "Believe me, Todd," Scott had said, "no one is more disappointed in me than I am." But yesterday Scott had received a very different phone call.
"Whatever you did to get your game back, keep doing it,"
a relieved-sounding Todd had said. Except Scott couldn't keep doing it. He would be on the road for 2 weeks, mostly playing teams in the Western Conference. The Admirals had 7 games scheduled, ending with one in Toronto before they flew home. Scott never minded being on the road. He liked his teammates, and he wasn't a nervous flyer like some of them. He also, unlike most of the team, didn't have a wife and kids that he had to leave behind. But for the first time in his career, Scott felt absurdly like he was leaving someone behind. Scott's seatmate and one of his assistant captains, Carter Vaughn, was particularly excited about their upcoming stop in Los Angeles. He had been seeing Gloria Gray, a very famous and extremely attractive television actress, for a few months now.
"Nothing serious,"
Carter had insisted the last time Scott asked him about her.
"Just 2 beautiful, chill people enjoying each other's company whenever we're in the same city."
Scott thought it might be more than that, but he didn't say anything. He was the last person who should be nosy about other people's love lives. Carter had his headphones on already. Since there was nothing to look at outside the window, Scott pulled out his book. It was a dumb spy novel, but it was something to pass the time with. Scott tried to read, but his mind kept wandering. It kept conjuring the image of a charming smoothie shop clerk with stunning hazel eyes and the cutest smile. He turned his head so Carter wouldn't notice his goofy grin. He had come to the game last night. Kip. Scott had nodded at him, but Kip hadn't done anything in return. Maybe he hadn't seen. Maybe he thought Scott was weird. Either way, it had made Scott absurdly happy to see him sitting in that arena. Happier still to see that he had brought a female friend with him, because Kip had implied that he was attracted to men. At least, Scott was pretty sure that was what had happened. He was hopelessly clueless about flirting. He frowned. Kip might be bisexual. Maybe that woman he had been with was his girlfriend. She had certainly looked pretty enough. Scott was not bisexual. What the world didn't know was that he wasn't straight either. He'd known he was gay for a long time, since he'd played junior, actually. He'd had a terrible crush on a teammate then, one he'd been sure was unrequited. Even if it hadn't been, he'd known Jacob would never act on it, would never admit it. Making a move on him would only have gotten Scott a black eye, or worse. It could have cost Scott his career if word had gotten out, because hockey players weren't gay. No NHL player was ever gay. Scott knew, now that he was older and wiser, that there was no way that was true. But it didn't change the fact that no one in the league had ever been openly gay, or even openly bisexual. NHL players married young, had a bunch of kids, and took the family to the cottage in the summer. NHL players golfed and drank and played poker and ate steak and went to strip clubs and slept with puck bunnies and used words like fag and queer liberally. So Scott kept his love life to himself, or lack thereof. It was hard enough to be discreet when you were just an average anybody. It was infinitely harder when you were a superstar athlete. Scott couldn't go online and hook up with random men. He would always be scared one of them would talk to the press. He felt the same way about sex workers. He avoided gay bars and clubs. Not that he would necessarily be into that sort of thing anyway. He was a terrible dancer. Most of his sexual encounters happened during the summers. He would go away to exotic places where people didn't know a damn thing about hockey. Italy, Spain, Brazil, Greece. Places where he was just one of many young, fit men looking for one thing. Summer had been a long damn time ago. What Scott didn't do, what he never, ever did, was flirt with shop clerks in Manhattan, because that would be stupid and careless and not at all worth the risk. He would certainly never give them a hint that he was interested in men. Scott had gotten good at concealing that fact. He'd had years of practice, after all. But there was something about Kip. Scott couldn't even name it. Obviously, he was good-looking. He's fucking gorgeous, Scott. Come on. With those dimples and those eyes. At the game last night, Scott had finally gotten a glimpse of Kip when he wasn't wearing a ball cap and apron. He'd like to get a much closer look sometime. Jesus. So yes, he was attractive. Lots of men in New York were attractive. Hell, lots of men on Scott's team were attractive. So that wasn't the entire reason why Scott couldn't stop thinking about him. There was just something about him. Scott wanted to talk to him for hours and find out everything about him, show him everything, give him everything. His reason for returning to the shop on game days wasn't a ruse. He sincerely felt that it was important to stick to routines when his game was going well. He had been playing the worst hockey of his career before he'd walked into that shop, and Kip had served him that smoothie, and he'd been on fire ever since. In more ways than one, if he was being honest. "Hey, stranger." "Hey, Dad," Kip said, as he went to the cupboard to grab the cereal box. It was Kip's day off, which meant a rare morning at home. "I never asked you how the game was the other night," his dad said. "It was awesome." Kip grinned to himself as he said it. "Really?" Dad sipped his coffee and looked at Kip from where he sat at the little kitchen table. "It was awfully nice of Scott Hunter to give you those tickets." "It was." "I don't think there's a person in Brooklyn your mother hasn't told about that." "God, it's not a big deal." "We don't have a lot of excitement in our lives." Dad smiled. Kip joined his father at the same round table he'd been eating breakfast at his whole life. He loved his parents, he loved this house, but he also desperately wanted to get out on his own. "How's Elena?" Dad asked. "Great. Completely impressive in every way." "No job openings for you at Equinox Tech?" "What the hell would I do at Equinox? I'm just a history nerd like my old man." "Well, what about the New York Admirals? Are they hiring?" "Yeah, team historian." His dad chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "So this thing with Scott Hunter?" "There is no thing with Scott Hunter." "All right," his dad said in that sing-song tone of fine, none of my business. "Seriously, he just thinks the dumb smoothies I make are good luck or something. Nothing to do with me." Your mother will be very disappointed to hear that." Kip rolled his eyes but smiled. "I think Megan's going to be here for dinner tonight," his father said. "Andrew, too." "Oh, nice." Megan was Kip's big sister, and Andrew was her boyfriend. The two of them lived together in Williamsburg. Whenever Megan came home for any occasion, it just reminded Kip that she had to come home. She was almost 4 years older than Kip, but still. "You planning on being here tonight?" his dad asked. "Sure," Kip said, forcing another smile. "Where else would I be?" Scott slumped against the wall of the steam room, exhausted and frustrated. They should have won this one. They had played their backup goalie, a kid from Sweden named Tommy Anderson, and it hadn't gone well. But Anderson wasn't to blame. No one had helped him. Scott ran his hands over his sweat-slick face and into his damp hair. Scott hadn't even showed up tonight. It had just been a terrible effort by the whole team, and it should have been an easy win. Coach Murdoch had already made them feel ashamed of themselves. He'd walked into the room, shook his head, and walked out. Worse than being screamed at. No one came into the steam room to bother Scott. They knew better. He sighed and stood up, tightening his towel around his waist. He needed a shower. And something to drink. He walked into the lounge area, still wearing his towel, and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. He downed it in one go, then turned to see Greg Huff sitting on the counter behind him. "So that was a shit show," Huff said. "You're not kidding," Scott said. "I don't even know what to say." "I mean, I'm not the captain, but maybe like, 'Hey, fuckheads, stop playing such shitty hockey,' or something." Scott smiled a little. "That was more or less what I was thinking." "Poor Anderson, man. I feel sorry for that kid." "Yeah," Scott said, looking in the direction of the dressing room. "How's he doing?" "Wonderful. How do you think he's doing?" "I'll talk to him. You're off the hook. Got our only goal tonight. Nice one, too." Huff gave him a lazy salute. "What I'm good for." It was true. Greg Huff was one of the best sharpshooters in the game. He had incredible aim, and had been an NHL All-Star for 8 consecutive seasons because of it. Scott grabbed a Gatorade from the fridge. Huff put out his hands in a catching position, so Scott threw him one as well. "I'm going to take a shower," Scott said, "but tell Anderson to stick around, all right?" "Will do." If Scott could have a whole team of Greg Huffs, he'd be thrilled. Greg was a real dependable stand-up guy, and a tremendous team presence on and off the ice. Not the flashiest player, and not the biggest guy by a long shot, but a huge contributor to the team. Scott went to the showers. A couple of other guys were in there. Most of the team had already showered and were getting ready to go back to the San Jose hotel. One of the guys in the shower was Frank Zulo. He was the only player on the team Scott just didn't like. He was a great defenseman, no question. Big and tough and a brutal fighter when necessary. But he was also a bully and a bit of a creep, really. There were plenty of guys like Zulo in the NHL. Scott made the water a little hotter, letting it wash away this terrible game. Tomorrow morning they flew to Chicago. They had a night off, then a game the following afternoon. Then a short night flight to Toronto for a game the next evening, and then home to New York. He left the showers and went to the lockers. He put on some shorts and a t-shirt and went to find Anderson in the dressing room. The young goalie was packing up his gear, looking miserable. "Hey," Scott said, sitting on the bench beside Anderson's enormous goalie gear bag. "I'm sorry we didn't help you out there tonight." Anderson huffed an angry laugh. "I fucked up," he said in his heavily accented English. "We all did. I looked like a fucking idiot out there." "Murdoch made the right call putting you in," Scott said. "I don't blame you a bit. I blame the rest of us. It's just psychological. Putting the backup goalie in makes us cocky, I guess. Like the coach thinks this game should be a walk, so we all believe it, and then I look like a fucking idiot?" Scott tilted his head in acknowledgement. "We're all going to be replaying our mistakes tonight when we're in our beds. No one on this team is proud of themselves tonight, but no one blames you either. I need you to know that." The young goalie gave him a reluctant smile. "Thanks," he said. He stuffed the last of his gear into his bag and stood. "I'm gonna head to the hotel, replay some of those mistakes, and then I'm gonna forget all about it and get ready for the next game." "Good man. You're rooming with Burke, right?" Scott asked, just to make conversation as they walked out of the room. "Yeah?" "Man, I'm sorry. Good luck." Tommy laughed. "Yeah, thanks. I pretend I can't understand him when I need him to stop talking." Scott laughed too. Tommy's English was excellent. "I'm going to get my stuff together," Scott said. "I'll see you tomorrow, Tommy. Good night." Kip scanned the crowded pub until he spotted Sean sitting alone at a small table. Sean grinned across the room at him. "Hey, man," Sean said, standing and hugging Kip when he reached the table. "Glad you could make it."
"Been around straight people too much lately,"
Kip joked, releasing Sean and settling into the wooden chair across the table from him. It was the same pub they'd been coming to for years, the Kingfisher. It had the same warm, cozy feel of any decades-old English-style pub, with dark wood and dim lighting and beer signs on the walls. A television at the back of the room showed local sports. At a glance, it didn't look like a gay bar at all, or at least not what most straight people probably pictured a gay bar being. But the men sat a little closer, and the bartenders were, in Kip's opinion, a little hotter. He loved this place. "We got a cute server," Sean said. "You'll like him."
"Oh, I can't compete with you."
Sean shook his head and raised his pint glass. "Too clean cut for me. He's all yours." Sean was a complicated guy. He was handsome, all dark skin and soft eyes and a warm smile. He was also an impeccable dresser, always looking like a J. Crew catalog model. He and Kip had fooled around a bit in college, nothing too serious, but they had both been eager to experiment. Sean had a thing for bad boys, though. Despite his straight-laced appearance, he had always been drawn to men with tattoos and an air of danger about them. Kip was just an eager-to-please nerd who couldn't figure his own life out. Their servers stopped by the table, and Sean hadn't been kidding. Slim, athletic build and blonde hair falling in his face. The guy was exactly Kip's type. Kip gave him a flirty smile as he ordered because he couldn't help himself. He received one in return, and the man introduced himself as Kyle. Sean laughed after Kyle left. "Always so fucking smooth."
"As if," Kip said. "I'm a mess most of the time."
"Nah, you're all charm. That boy's already thinking about telling you when his shift ends." Kip looked over his shoulder toward the bar where Kyle was waiting, presumably for Kip's beer.
"Well,
but first, we have something to talk about," Sean said.
"What's that?"
"I've been thinking about when we were out with Jimmy and Chuck last week."
"Oh?"
Kip could really use that beer. "First of all, I feel like we maybe ganged up on you when we were—"
"Asking me what the fuck I was doing with my life?"
"Encouraging you to pursue your dreams."
"Right."
Kyle, the wonderful angel, came to the table with Kip's pint of local red ale. As he leaned to place the glass on the table, he took the opportunity to rest a hand on Kip's shoulder. Kip felt the tips of his fingers brush the back of his neck. "Let me know if you need anything else," Kyle said, the double meaning lost on no one.
"Look,"
Kip said to Sean, after enjoying a parting smile from Kyle.
"I know you guys just—"
"I have a proposition for you," Sean interrupted. Kip raised an eyebrow.
"Those never ended particularly well before."
"A business proposition. And I remember a few of those previous times that weren't bad at all." Kip smiled into his beer.
"Me too."
"I propose," Sean said, "that you apply for a better job." Kip fought the urge to roll his eyes.
"Like where?"
"I have a friend—"
"A friend, huh?"
"He works at the Museum of the City of New York." Okay. Kip was listening now. "He told me that they are just about to post an opening for an assistant educator. You know, someone who helps organize school trips and stuff. Teach the little kiddies all about our great city. Kip slumped back in his chair. I'm not qualified for that. Sean looked at him pointedly. Do I need to use my Elena voice? No, Kip grumbled. You will apply for this job, Kip Grady, and you will dazzle them with your charm and your love of history and the fact that you have lived here all your life.
I won't even get an interview.
I'm calling Elena.
Fine, she won't answer. She hates phone calls.
Apply for the job, Kip. Kip sighed.
Why not, right? Okay, I'll apply. Thanks for letting me know.
Don't mention it, asshole. Now. Sean leaned back and made a show of looking around the bar. How about you see if our friend Kyle feels like celebrating your glamorous new career? This time Kip did roll his eyes.
I'm not celebrating shit, and...
He stopped himself because he wasn't sure what he wanted to say.
I'm holding out for someone else right now. You probably know him. He's the captain of the New York Admirals. You might remember him from People magazine's 50 Most Beautiful People issue. Yeah, I have a crush on him. He's almost definitely heterosexual. Fingers crossed.
Instead, he just said,
I think I'm going to head home early tonight. But let's see if we can't find you someone.
It wasn't fucking charging. It was a fucking hit. It's hockey, you blind mother.
That's enough. Scott grasped Zulo firmly by both arms and hauled him away from the referee. Zulo turned his head and kept screaming.
What? I can't fucking touch anyone now? This not a contact sport anymore. Open your fucking eyes, you.
I'll talk to him. Just go to the box, Zulo. Zulo shook his head. Carter skated over to help escort him to the penalty box. If Zulo kept the yelling up, he'd end up with a game misconduct. Scott went back to the referee. Charging, Hal? Really? You telling me I don't know how to do my job, Hunter? I know what I saw. Hal Coleman, one of Scott's favorite referees, only came up to Scott's chest, but he was tough as nails under his calm demeanor. Smart, too. Well, Scott said, glancing at the penalty box that was now occupied by a fuming Frank Zulo. Won't hurt him to cool off a bit in there anyway. He's a real sweetheart, Hal agreed. Scott looked across the ice to the Chicago bench. Is Becker all right? I'm going to check on him. Seems to still be alive. Hal looked pointedly at Scott. Tell your boy if I see that shit again, he's out of the game. Noted. Hal left to head over to the Chicago bench, and Scott headed to the penalty box. Couldn't change his mind, he said. Just take 2 to cool off, and then we'll finish disappointing the home crowd.
It wasn't charging. No fucking way that was charging,
Zulu spat. Except the part where you charged him.
Jesus fucking Christ, Hunter. You fucking serious? You playing for Chicago now? Becker took a dive.
Scott was already skating back to the bench. Take 2, Frank, he called over his shoulder. Carter caught up with him. How much can I slip Hal to suspend Zulo for a few games? Come on, Scott said dryly. Zulo is perfectly capable of getting suspended without your help. Fucking psychopath, Carter muttered. We're still doing Chicago cut after the game, right? I need those stakes. Yeah. Hal blew the whistle for the face-off. Scott went down to the circle in their end of the ice to take it, and threw some encouraging words at their goaltender as he skated by the net. Good game, Benny. Don't say a damn word. You jinx me, and I'm coming after you. Scott chuckled. Eric Bennett was as mild-mannered as they come off the ice. But once he was in the crease, he was as fierce a competitor as Scott had ever known. Scott bent down at the circle and put his stick on the ice. He glanced up to meet the eye of his opponent, a star center from Chicago named Clark.
If Zulo tries that shit again,
Clark growled,
I'm sending Harvey after him.
Man, go ahead. Don't know why you do that to Harvey, though. Scott smiled.
Zulo is a piece of shit.
Now. If you can't say something nice... As soon as Scott won the face-off, he raced down to the opposing team's zone and took a quick pass back from Carter. He launched the puck at the net and watched it sail over the goalie's shoulder for a short-handed goal. It felt so fucking good to have his game back. Chapter 4. Kip had more than one job. As well as working at Straw and Berry, he was on a call list for a company that hired servers for events, like fundraisers and ceremonies. A friend had gotten him on the list, and Kip had worked a couple dozen events over the past year and a half. He had received a call to see if he was available to work a fundraiser for one of the children's hospitals Wednesday night. A black-tie cocktail reception with some speakers at Chelsea Piers. Kip was available, and he really needed the money. So on Wednesday, he left Straw and Berry at 2 o'clock with his backpack containing his wadded-up apron and ball cap, and also his black leather shoes, his black dress pants, and a few basic toiletries so he could freshen up before the high-class event. He got off the train in Chelsea with a couple of hours to kill. The miserable February weather drove him into the nearest Starbucks, where he took his Americano to a table to sit and think about a certain NHL superstar. He had been kind of hoping the 2-week Scott Hunter drought would be enough to end this ridiculous crush. It was unlikely he would be seeing Scott on a regular basis, or at all, for much longer. One bad home game and it would be over. Or maybe Scott had already found a new good luck charm. Anyway, the drought hadn't ended the crush. He had tomorrow off at his other job, but would be working Friday. Hopefully Scott would come by, if only because Kip wanted to thank him for the tickets. When Kip was really bored, like right now at his little table in a Starbucks in Chelsea, he would let himself fantasize a bit about what it would be like to date Scott Hunter. For one thing, just having access to that body. What would all those muscles feel like under his hands? What would it be like to have the full weight of Scott covering him, pressing him into a mattress, or against a wall? He wondered what kissing him would be like. If Scott's full pink lips were as soft as they looked, he wondered how he tasted. What it would be like to run his tongue over those perfect teeth. And what would it be like to date someone as famous as Scott? As rich as Scott? Kip couldn't imagine what it would feel like to have that much money. Even a fraction of that much money. Hell, at the moment, Kip couldn't imagine what it would feel like to be able to afford the Starbucks sandwich he had kind of wanted to order with his coffee. He let himself daydream about going to the games as Scott's boyfriend, sitting in his usual seat, bursting with pride when Scott did something amazing. They would celebrate Scott's big win at home that night, together. Maybe he would greet Scott at the door when he came back from a long road trip. Scott would be so happy to see him. Kip was getting a little hot and bothered in this very public coffee shop. He sighed and took a sip of coffee that was far too hot. The pain brought him down to earth. If you put half as much energy into finding an actual, realistic boyfriend as you do into fantasizing about a superstar millionaire who probably isn't even interested in men, let alone you. Kip hadn't gotten any action in a month. No, 2 months. God, almost 3 months. It was his own fault, really. He hadn't been going out much. He used to, all the time. He'd never been in a relationship that he would call serious, but he used to love the challenge of picking guys up at bars or gyms or even grocery stores. He was naturally flirtatious, or at least he used to be. Something about being 25, living with his parents, and working at a smoothie shop with nothing promising on the horizon had killed his swagger. He took another sip of coffee that was still too hot. How? There might be a cute guy working with him tonight. Maybe he could break this dry spell. Scott tugged at his navy tuxedo jacket and fiddled with his cufflinks. He hated these events, but wanted to use his celebrity for good, and children's hospitals were a particular favorite cause of his. He was scheduled to speak tonight, but he wasn't nervous about that. He never minded public speaking, and this would only be a short speech anyway. What he hated was this, being on display for a room of wealthy, fawning donors. Making small talk with tedious people wearing a tuxedo, being mindful of his every move, his every word. He was tired. The road trip had been long, and they had just gotten back this morning. It would be a challenge to stay in a good mood tonight, but he would, because that was his job. There was a loud din in the room of people talking and laughing. It was a sea of dark tuxes and mostly dark gowns. In one corner of the room, a trio played mellow jazz music. He stared into his Pilsner glass of beer and realized he was starving. The only food seemed to be on little trays being carried by servers wearing all black. He inched toward one, hoping to snag a shrimp or something. The server turned, and Scott was shocked to see that it was Kip. Kip looked just as surprised. He took a step back, and the tray wobbled dangerously on his arm before he quickly grabbed it with his other hand.
Scott?
Scott gathered himself and smiled.
Scott is fine. I didn't know you were going to be here.
That makes two of us. Kip's eyes were stunning, set against all of the black of his uniform. He was more beautiful than Scott remembered even. Scott took a couple of things off Kip's tray just to make it less awkward. "Do you work a lot of these things?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation normal.
"A few. This one was last minute."
Scott nodded. He desperately tried to think of something else to ask him, but all he could think about was how soft Kip's hair looked.
"Hey," Kip said, "thanks again for the tickets. That was amazing being there."
"No problem. I'm glad you had a good time. It was nice seeing you there."
"Oh, you saw me?"
"I nodded at you when I skated by. Kinda subtle, I guess."
"Oh, no, I saw. I just didn't think it was meant for me."
"It was," Scott said, far too earnestly. He took a step back and cleared his throat. "Anyway,
"You're probably busy."
"Right. And you're working, obviously."
"Yeah, so
I'll let you get to it."
all right."
Scott placed a hand on Kip's free arm, needing to make contact somehow. "It was nice seeing you, Kip."
Yeah, you too. I guess I'll see you around tonight."
Scott nodded, and Kip left to serve canopies. A hand landed on Scott's arm immediately, and he turned to talk to one of the event organizers. He felt a lot lighter than he had before. Scott spent the rest of the evening chatting with different people, but he kept scanning the room for Kip. Their eyes met a couple of times. The first time, Scott quickly looked away, embarrassed. The second time, though, he let his gaze linger, and he was rewarded with an adorable grin from Kip that caused Scott's stomach to flip. "Oh no, Hunter, you are in trouble." Once Scott had given his speech and had mingled for another hour, he was desperate to get out of his tux, out of this room. Except he caught Kip as he was loading empty glasses onto the tray. "You have to stay much longer?" Scott asked.
"Another hour, maybe. Cleanup isn't too bad this time."
Scott smiled a little. He couldn't think of anything else to say. He just didn't want to leave. But he should leave. Otherwise he might say something dangerous. Scott was a superstitious man. He believed everything happened for a reason, and it couldn't be a coincidence that Kip was here tonight. Fate had thrown them into the same room together. It was an opportunity. Scott just didn't know what to do with it. "They never have enough food at these things," he said, as casually as he could manage. Kip looked up from the table he was clearing.
"At least you got to eat something," he said. "I've been carrying around trays of food I can't eat all night. I'm starving."
He kept his eyes on Scott's, waiting, and Scott knew this was his moment. Right here. "There's a place a couple of blocks from here that has great burgers," Scott said, still carefully. "Not a direct invitation. Not yet. It's open late."
"Oh?"
"I was thinking of heading there after—" Kip stood straight up to meet Scott's gaze.
"Are you asking me to come get a burger with you?"
Scott was absolutely terrified, but goddamn he wanted this. "Yes." Kip grinned, showing his dimples.
"All right. I'll meet you as soon as I'm done here. At the front doors."
"Yeah." It suddenly occurred to Scott that he was wearing a tuxedo and didn't have a change of clothing on him. "An hour, you think?" Kip shrugged.
"Maybe a little less. Maybe longer if you keep distracting me."
"Okay." It was all Scott could do to keep from clapping his hands together with glee. They were doing this. They were going to get a burger together. He would fix the tuxedo problem, and he would let this thing happen. He didn't think he could get to his apartment and back here on time. No nearby clothing stores were still open unless... When Kip saw Scott again, he was standing near the front doors of the complex, wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt that had Brooklyn written across the front, and a black knit hat that said NYC on it. He had a cheap-looking knapsack slung over his shoulder containing, Kip assumed, most of his tuxedo. I didn't have a change of clothes with me, so I went to a bodega that sold some touristy stuff, Scott explained. Dressed like he was, you almost couldn't tell he was Scott Hunter. But Kip knew. And he knew that Scott Hunter had frantically bought souvenir clothing so he could go on a date with him. Maybe a date. Kip smiled.
You look good.
He did. A little odd, perhaps, in a hoodie, navy tuxedo pants, and dress shoes, but good. Kip was pretty grubby, in the same jeans he'd worn earlier in the day, and a black T-shirt he had been wearing under his uniform tonight. He zipped up his parka before following Scott out into the cold. It was very cold.
You must be freezing, he said. You sure you want to walk there?
I run hot, Scott said with a grin. I'll be fine. They walked together through the quiet streets. Not a lot of people out on this frigid Wednesday night. There were a few flurries in the air, but no wind. Despite his claim of not being cold, Scott had shoved his hands into the pocket of his hoodie.
How was the road trip?
Kip asked, after spending a solid minute trying to think of something to say. Good. Went well. We won 5 of the 7 games. Should have won the one in San Jose, but that's a rant you don't want to hear.
You like the travel?
I don't mind it. I like some cities more than others. Some cities like me more than others.
They'd all love you if you played for their team.
Maybe. They walked another block in silence. Kip still couldn't believe who he was walking with.
He's just a guy. He's just a really hot, enormous guy who's famous and beloved and cold.
Scott was definitely huffing a bit as they walked, and his shoulders were hunched.
You all right?
Kip asked. Oh, yeah, it is pretty cold. Kip smiled.
Yeah, okay, tough guy.
He got brave and nudged Scott a bit with his elbow. Scott laughed, and his breath came out in white clouds. Kip swallowed.
Is the burger place close?
Yeah, it's right there. Scott pointed across the street.
Let's get you inside.
They entered, and Scott smiled at Kip as the warm air hit them. Kip could not believe how beautiful he was. They ordered at the counter. Scott paid, and sat at a table in the corner to wait for their food. The restaurant was quiet. Kip wished he knew what was going on here. Normally when a guy invited him to get some food or a drink, there were no doubts about where it might lead. But this wasn't a regular guy, and it was possible that Scott didn't realize this seemed like a date. Maybe he was just lonely. How in the hell could Scott Hunter be lonely? You live in Manhattan? Scott asked suddenly.
Nah, Brooklyn, born and raised.
Ah, I'm from upstate, Rochester. Kip smiled a little.
I know.
Right. I guess my life is kind of public knowledge.
Kinda,
Kip said, and feeling brave added.
But I'll bet you have some secrets.
Scott turned pink. It was cute. He fiddled with the straw in his soda cup until it seemed to inspire his next question. Have you worked at Straw Plus Berry long?
Actually,
Kip said, feigning offense.
It's pronounced straw and berry, so...
Scott put up his hands and grinned. Sorry, didn't mean to insult you.
That's okay.
Kip sighed dramatically.
I'm sure people get your team name wrong all the time.
Scott shook his head, still smiling. Do you like it? Working there, I mean. Kip actually laughed at that.
It's all right. No, I don't really like it.
Is there something else you would rather be doing?
Of course. I just don't know what that is yet. I have a history degree.
No kidding. I never finished college. Kip gave him a gentle smirk again.
I know.
Right.
Did you want to finish college, I mean?
Scott seemed surprised by the question. Yes, I did. I wanted to finish, to graduate. My mom, she would have liked that. And I enjoyed the classes. I've always liked learning.
What were you studying?
A little bit of everything. I couldn't commit to a major, and I didn't need to. The school didn't care what I took, just as long as I performed on the ice. Kip felt a little sad for him.
Must be weird, he said. Everyone's wanted a piece of you since you were a teenager. Probably never felt like your life was your own.
Scott looked stunned. Kip turned red. He'd crossed a line.
Sorry, Jesus, forget I said that, all right? I don't even know you.
No, Scott said. It did feel like that. I don't want to complain, obviously, but yeah.
You're allowed to complain.
Scott smiled at him. I'm really not. It would get me despised by everyone.
Well, you can complain to me.
The way Scott looked at him then, Kip would never forget it. If they were alone, and if he were someone else, and Scott were someone else, he would have expected Scott to lunge across the table and haul him into a hungry kiss. Instead, burgers were placed in front of them by a server, and the moment was gone. As they ate, Scott's eyes darted around the small restaurant, and it occurred to Kip that he had never taken his winter hat off.
Worried you'll get recognized?
Kip asked. Not worried. I'm just hoping I won't. Not right now. Scott picked up his burger, then put it down without taking another bite. He fiddled with his straw again. He finally sighed and turned his eyes up to meet Kip's. It's just nice, doing this.
Hanging out with someone?
With you. Kip was speechless, and Scott looked absolutely tortured. His eyes were pleading with Kip to understand him, to not make him spell it out.
Oh,
is what Kip finally said. Scott's face relaxed a bit. I'm not good at this, he said. It's important to me to keep my private life private, and that's increasingly hard to do. So I don't ever
pick up guys.
Scott flushed a little. Kip loved it. Yeah. Kip could not believe that this thing that he had been trying not to pretend was a date was actually a date. It was unreal. But suddenly he didn't want to eat another bite of his stupid burger. He wanted to get Scott Hunter somewhere private and let him slam Kip against a wall. He decided to be bold.
Is there somewhere we can go?
He asked in a low voice. Yeah, Scott said, his voice huskier than it had been a second ago, his eyes a little darker. Kip wasn't naive. He knew what this was. Hunter wasn't out, and he had to get his action as discreetly as possible. Nothing serious or long-term. He just needed to get off, and Kip was more than happy to help him with that. He was honored that Scott felt he could trust him to keep a secret, really.
Let's go,
Kip said. Chapter 5. They dumped the rest of their dinners into the garbage cans and walked out, saying nothing to each other. Scott pulled his phone out when they were outside, calling some sort of car service. Should be here in a minute or two, he said after he hung up. Kip just nodded, buzzing with anticipation. The car arrived, a black SUV, and they slid into the leather seats behind the partition. Scott sat straight upright with his hands on his knees, not looking at Kip at all. His fingers flexed and curled restlessly. Kip placed his hand on one of Scott's thighs, feeling the solid muscle under the smooth fabric of his suit pants. He didn't move his hand, but let it rest there as a reassuring presence. Scott glanced at Kip's hand, then turned to meet his eyes.
I can keep a secret,
Kip said, almost a whisper because he wasn't sure if the driver could hear them.
And I promise I'll make it good for you.
I know. Scott placed his own hand over Kip's and tangled their fingers. He pressed his lips together like he was trying to suppress a smile, like he was giddy about this, about Kip. Fucking incredible. The car took them to a newer building in the Lower East Side. Kip was surprised. He had expected something, well, he knew it had to be near Straw and Berry, but in a fancy neighborhood maybe. But he supposed every neighborhood in Manhattan was getting fancy these days, and this looked like a brand new building. It was also clearly a very expensive building. The lobby reminded Kip of the room that housed the Egyptian temple at the Met, vast and serene, with marble everywhere. Scott led them to the elevator and typed in a code. When the doors opened, they were right in front of Scott's door. There were no other units on the floor. Scott typed in another code and opened the door. They were met with a floor-to-ceiling view of the lights of Brooklyn across the East River. "Holy shit," Kip murmured, walking trance-like toward the windows. Scott left the lights of the apartment off. He stood behind Kip and said, "The view is definitely a selling point." "Geez, yeah." Scott's hand was on Kip's shoulder. Kip waited a beat, then turned to face him. The lights of the city played against Scott's face in the dark. His brow was furrowed, like he was arguing with himself, but his eyes kept landing on Kip's mouth. Kip decided to take the plunge. Grabbing a handful of Scott's hoodie, he pulled him down and pressed their lips together. Scott responded immediately with a hungry moan. He parted his lips, then placed his hand on Kip's face as he pushed his tongue into his mouth, kissing him like a starving man, like he hadn't been with anyone in ages. Kip kissed back, exploring Scott's mouth, tasting him for the first time. Kip's head swam. "I can't believe this is happening." Scott unzipped Kip's parka and slid it off his arms, letting it fall to the floor. His hands fell to Kip's waist and slipped up under his t-shirt. Kip shivered at the sensation of Scott's large, calloused hands brushing over his skin. They kissed for what felt like forever in the dark apartment, until Kip finally asked, breathlessly, "You got a bedroom?" "Yeah," Scott laughed when he said it. He sounded nervous, but he gestured for Kip to follow him. He led him through a doorway that revealed a giant bedroom with an even better view of the Brooklyn Bridge than the living room. There was a California king-size bed against the far wall. Aside from that, the room was sparsely decorated, but masculine and impressive. Scott kept the lighting dim in the room. He smiled shyly before he pulled the souvenir hoodie off over his head and tossed it onto a chair. The white t-shirt he still wore was stretched tight across his chest. "Is this okay?" Scott asked. "I'm sorry if I don't do this very often." "It's really fucking okay," Kip said, stepping towards Scott and placing one hand on his ridiculous biceps. "Let me take care of you. You can just be Scott from Rochester tonight, all right?" Scott looked at him with so much gratitude it was heartbreaking. Then his gaze went to where Kip's hand was on his arm, and his gratitude quickly turned to something else. Scott kissed him hard and lifted Kip's t-shirt. Kip took the hint and stepped back to pull his shirt off. Scott did the same, and good God. Kip had seen pictures of Scott, had even seen some shirtless locker room interviews. But seeing Scott standing in front of him, a wall of muscle and smooth pale skin, "Fuck," Kip muttered. Mesmerized, he watched the rise and fall of Scott's massive chest as he breathed. Then he saw that Scott was staring at Kip's naked chest the same way, as if Kip was even in the same league. Sure, Kip kept in shape. He went to the gym whenever he had time, but Scott was... "You are gorgeous," Scott said. Scott was impressed, apparently. Kip grinned and bit his bottom lip as he walked backward toward the bed. Scott returned the grin and followed, stopping at the end of the bed as Kip fell back onto the mattress. Kip propped himself up on his elbows and gazed up at Scott in a manner that he hoped was seductive. "What do you want to do with me?" Kip drawled. "I don't know. There are a lot of things I've thought about." Kip's mouth dropped open and his cock got uncomfortably harder in his pants. "Scott has been thinking about this. With me." He instructed himself to keep his cool. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he'd be damned if he was going to fuck it up.
Pick your favorite, he said. Or hell, pick your top 10, or we've got plenty of time.
Scott moved quickly, covering Kip's body with his own as he took his mouth again. Kip kissed him back eagerly. He couldn't get enough of Scott's mouth, and he wanted Scott to know how much he wanted this. He wanted him to feel confident to do whatever he'd been fantasizing about. When Scott placed a firm hand on Kip's crotch, gripping his erection through the denim, Kip groaned into his mouth. He jerked his hips up and pressed into Scott's palm.
Yes, please. Touch me everywhere.
Scott broke their kiss and looked down at him with wild eyes.
Do it, Kip breathed. Whatever you're thinking, please.
Kip leaned forward to kiss him again, but Scott was already moving down his body. His big hands quickly unfastened Kip's jeans and hauled them down to his thighs. Kip didn't even have a chance to react before Scott was mouthing him through his underwear.
Good fuck,
Kip cried out, partly out of surprise and partly because Scott Hunter's beautiful mouth felt so fucking good. He stayed propped on his elbows so he could watch, because holy shit. Perhaps encouraged by Kip's enthusiasm, Scott tugged the waistband of his briefs down, freeing Kip's erection. He lowered his lips to the head, then glanced up at Kip as if he was asking permission. Kip nodded and murmured,
Yes, please.
When Scott wrapped those plush lips around him, enveloping his cock in delicious wet heat, it was all Kip could do to stop himself from thrusting up into his mouth. The only thing that stopped him was his assumption that Scott probably didn't have a whole lot of experience sucking cock. Not that he was bad at it. He was just a bit frantic, working his mouth on Kip's cock, like they were in an alley instead of Scott's home. Like he was worried someone might walk in on them at any moment and stop them.
Hey,
Kip said, a little choked.
It's all right. No need to hurry. Fuck. You might want to slow down if you want me to last.
The tension seemed to leave Scott's shoulders as he slowed his tongue. He was making gorgeous noises, as if he was the one being sucked off, instead of the other way around. But he would have to stop soon or Kip would be done. The whole scene was too fucking much. Kip placed a hand on the side of Scott's face, and Scott looked up, lips still stretched wide around him.
What do you want?
Kip asked. Scott's mouth slid off Kip's cock with a long, obscene drag of his tongue, and Kip's eyes rolled back. Jesus. Scott could say literally anything right now, and Kip would be down with it.
I want you to fuck me, Scott said.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.